We begin tonight the second part of this book, Attaining the Mystical Consciousness. The third part is applying it, living it, remaining in it. Now we're in the process in this book of becoming aware of it, its meaning, its relationship to the purpose of life, and just to find exactly where we are in this universe. You might liken the consciousness of mankind in general today to the cocoon. You call it a parenthesis, you might well use the word cocoon as well. Earthbound, a grub, unable to move outside of a very limited orbit, held into this mold by the mind and the body, limited within time, within space, within the calendar, by the climate, by the various pressures and powers that seem to hem us in and keep us within this straitjacket. Now this earthbound consciousness is the creature, not aware that there's another stage called a butterfly, not aware that there's a city 100 miles away, another consciousness just beyond the level of the sense mind. Now really, it wasn't too many years ago when we were this grub in this cocoon, and looking around us, we find that many of our friends of yesterday are still there, still living in the belief that material forms are the ultimate, and that life consists of the acquisition of these forms. It wasn't too long ago that we found ourselves in that consciousness, and the memory of it is so recent, in fact, that it's easy to remember the attitudes, the frustrations, and even the resistance to change. Joel has a marvelous phrase in here about our resistance to change. We come into perhaps a comfortable state, and we'd rather live in the death of luxury than in the life of lack. We'd rather live in the comfort of these physical things than we would in the discomfort of finding our way through to break out of the mold. When you reach a point where you become aware that there is another consciousness than the human, that there is a human consciousness, then you divide this earth into two, the unhuman and the illumined. And you find that very few of the people you know move in that sphere of consciousness which is even moderately illumined. And so you are more or less a pioneer. You look back and you see this consciousness very carefully described in symbolism in the Bible. In Egypt, we find people there in the Judaic religion completely unaware of another or higher way of life, under the boot of the Pharaoh, living in servitude, and themselves rather animalistic. So animalistic that very simple laws of life had to be laid down for them, called the Ten Commandments. Now these represent the human consciousness, whether it's in the year 2000 BC or this minute. And Moses represents that quality in you and me which comes as a divine dispensation to lift us beyond that unillumined state, out of darkness, out of servitude to the material pressures of our lives, out of bodily pains, bodily pleasures, out of the various diseases and lacks and limitations with which we are fenced in by the mind. And there comes in us this divine impulse called Moses. A very ordinary man by all standards, except for one thing. He discovered the presence of spirit in his being. And this new dimension, discovered in you, becomes your Moses, your guide to take you out of the lower self, the unillumined self, the Egypt, into a higher land. And it's a long journey. And on the way, your guide is this inner Moses, this very subtle coming and going light, which takes you into an awareness of something called God. And although God at first is a very definite abstraction, there is invisible manna from the sky suddenly appearing, and there are on the way new faculties developing. And suddenly a life that was completely in slavery, bound in on all sides, in darkness, with no light overhead, begins to feel and glimpse something higher. And on this march upward and outward from the unillumined state, the cocoon is opening up. Your faculties are beginning to find a coordination. The letter of truth becomes the way, not spirit, the letter. And we follow this letter of truth. We call it the law. And the law gives some kind of a formula, whereas before we were merely downtrodden, even too tired to seek, confused, mortal, knowing only that life began and life ended. And this parenthesis, the mystical way, attempts to erase. The goal becomes erasing the parenthesis, erasing the cocoon, removing the tomb which keeps us earthbound. And that step which takes us out of that darkness into a measure of light is typified by Exodus in the Bible. Now we become conscious of the law, usually a little too self-righteous, and being self-righteous, demanding that others pursue the same way. And at this state, we begin to be respected. We become authorities. We have a status. And there's danger. For in this authoritative status, often accompanied by a touch of wealth, we are willing to remain in the letter of the truth, in the letter of human righteousness. And this is not the way of spirit. The nature of spirit, being infinite, being an unfoldment without an end, demands that we never allow ourselves to remain stagnant or self-satisfied, but rather we must open a way for the infinite unfoldment to ever bring us new faculties, new experiences, new levels of awareness. And this is where the self-righteous refuse to walk into illumination. They are in that comfortable in-between stage, and Spirit ultimately will break them. They are committed to mortality. On either side of the veil they will be in a parenthesis. On this side or on that side. They cannot move out of the cocoon. They cannot get off the earth. But then there's those 22 minutes, or was it seconds, when the plane gets up in the air. That first journey off the ground, that first light, this beginning of illumination. Now when that came to you, you may remember, or it may have come in quite a subtle way that you didn't even know it had hit you. But that leads to the solo flight, the Lindbergh flight. When you get into your own plane and you make your passage across an ocean that you've never crossed before. And to make this, you have had to build a consciousness, an awareness. You have had to come to a point where the abstraction called God is no longer abstract. You've had to come to a point where, instead of a sense mind, you became aware of a soul. And you moved from sense to soul. And this took you beyond your human mind. Took you out of the cocoon. And suddenly, the butterfly. Not earthbound anymore, but no longer a grub. The birth of the butterfly is the death of the grub. The birth of the new consciousness is the death of the old consciousness. And the dying daily is the birthing of the new self. This new self, this new consciousness, is the illumination, the illumined state. And now, the difference is very marked between the unillumined and illumined. You can see it clearly all around you, the fear, the antagonisms, the self-doubts, the greed, the slavery and bondage to this world, the unawareness of another level. And then, from this comes that acquisitiveness, that aggressiveness, which is necessary to one who thinks that he came into this world with nothing. And having nothing to start with, he must spend his life acquiring. He is unaware of a previous experience. He is unaware of a developed consciousness that could be brought to this experience. He's starting completely new, earthbound all over again. And the illumined, on the other hand, find a way to relax. They have learned that within themselves is a power. And they are not seeking to acquire the forms of this world. For they know the nature of the forms of this world to be illusory. And they have learned too, one of the greatest things that can be learned, that life is not a physical experience, as it is with the unillumined. They have learned that life is a state of consciousness, and that the physical experience, which is the all-important one in the earlier creature stages, is now but the added thing. As a matter of fact, the physical experience, the world experience, becomes a barometer. Not an end in itself, but a barometer. And we use it like a gas gauge. We use it as an evidence to show us the degree to which the inner consciousness has received the infinite. So we move very quietly in this particular state, learning now that the God who once had been abstract is a living God. And now Now we're very curious about this God because this God seems to be in control of what we had previously considered the power of evil, the power of lack, the power of limitation. The various powers of the world have no dominion over this God we have discovered. And we find that we can harness our energies, our intellect, and all that we seem to be to this one living God. And now our curiosity about this God is intense, because we have also discovered that all power rests in God itself. There is no other power on the face of the earth. There is one power, and the belief in good and evil is dissolved. We no longer have to fear the power of evil. We no longer have to resist the power of evil. We no longer have to accept that there is a power of evil. For we have learned that there is only the power of the Christ. To show you the change quite quickly that takes place over 2,000 years, suppose you had sat with me at a recent conference I had with a young girl, young college student, and her question was how to tighten up her attitudes, how to get herself interested enough in her studies, how to find her way, and so on. And I thought, well, it's going to be rather difficult starting here to come to any real progress in one lesson. So my question to her was, first let me know what you think your purpose is. Have you come to any agreement within yourself about the purpose that you hope to fulfill? Truly, I was floored when she said, yes, my purpose is to realize the Christ of my own being. And once she had said that, it was quite a shock to know that in 2,000 years the world is completely unaware that that is the purpose. And here a young girl who has no major experience in this work very clearly sees it as her purpose, to realize the Christ of her being. Now this individual obviously understands what the Christ of her being is. And although to the world she may have appeared unlettered, it is very clear that in this experience she has brought something from a previous experience. Elimination is a slow and a continuous process. It only appears to suddenly gleam through, but it actually is evolving. And so we are all really evolving states of consciousness. In the mystery schools, the Essenes were one. In Greece, Rome, Egypt, India, Tibet, they had two kinds. One was spiritual and one was mental. The mental mystery schools were very magical in their demonstrations. And they could easily fool some into believing that they were really a power. The spiritual schools, one of which was obviously the teaching ground for Jesus, were teaching a completely different message than the mental schools. They were teaching the power which was not called the Christ, but was the power of the Christ. They were teaching the power of the inner spirit, its indestructibility, its infinity, its all power, and they were teaching that this power in a person, released, made him impervious to every power on the earth. It is believed that when Jesus revealed this, that his execution was ordered by the group from which he sprang, the Essenes. Now this power is like a wave. It appears on earth, and then it's submerged. And then it arises again, and then it's submerged. And in this particular age, this power is very clearly here. This power of Christ in you, called Emmanuel, when realized, develops in you faculties that are not known to the human mind. Jesus demonstrated some of those faculties, and one of the strangest was the faculty of supply. He had the power to supply, not only himself, but to supply, so that it made no difference what was needed and where, he could supply that need. And that's a very strange faculty. But it is a faculty not of a person. It is a faculty of the realized Christ. He had the faculty to heal, the faculty to teach, the faculty to reveal, the faculty to enlighten, the faculty to glorify, the faculty to raise others into truth. Now these are all faculties that come with the Christ realization. And because we are often too willing to stand still in our happy consciousness, we do not attain these new faculties, and we do not understand the meaning of being poor in spirit. We do not understand that spirit is the food, the substance of life itself, and that our constant turning into silence to receive spirit is the way you are fed by this substance. And then the new faculties develop. And because the Pharisees, unlike the Essenes, and the Sadducees, unlike the Essenes, were willing to rest on their own laurels at the letter stage of truth, they never followed the letter into the spirit of truth, and were never fed by the Spirit, and consequently never rose up to receive that which is the very essence of the spiritual life. It is necessary to receive the will of God. Without the will of God functioning you, you cannot move beyond the letter of truth. Thy will be done. Now isn't it clear that no such statement would be made if the will of God were being done? And all over this world today, the will of God is not being done. It's very easy to see that in all of the areas of decadence that we witness. You cannot think that is the will of God. In disasters and epidemics, in assassinations, in poverty and famine, in crime waves, man has assumed that this is the will of God punishing somebody. But what a blasphemy of God that is. The longer you dwell on the subject, you'll discover that there are two places, heaven and hell. When you carefully look around you, you'll discover this is not heaven. Hell is that place where the presence of God is not realized. And that is where the world is. We have taken for granted the utter degradation that we witness in all quarters without realizing that this represents the absence of God awareness, and that most of the human race is unillumined, asleep, dead, walking in their sleep, and suffering untold miseries Because God is still just a word. The mold is still surrounding the soul. And the activity of that soul is not coming forth, and so man is imprisoned. Now in your illumined state, regardless of the measure of it, you are responding to the activity of your soul. And the purpose of your soul is truly beautiful. We have looked out, we have seen flowers. And we say how glorious they are, how beautiful, how fragrant. Isn't God's handiwork incredible? Who but God could create those beautiful flowers in such infinite variety? But that isn't the flower that God created. There is another. There is an infinite flower of pure light. An infinite idea called flower in the mind of God. And that flower, interpreted by the universal mind, and that idea fed into individual minds, becomes the many, 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 many varieties of flowers that we witness. But for every flower, there is a seed. And we have taken this for granted, saying, oh, how marvelous is God's work, without really catching many fine points of that flower and that seed. Now the seed goes into the ground, disappears, and up comes the flower. If that had been an invisible seed, not planted in the ground, and you didn't know there was such a thing, you would have really marveled that a flower could come just out of the ground, out of nothing. And so you were first given the opportunity to see a seed. And that seed in the ground, now invisible, at least we know is there. And without it, there'd be no flower. And so it is that you can now take another step in your witnessing of truth and see that for every activity in the world that is visible, there is an invisible seed. There is no activity in this world without an invisible seed to bring it in flower. It doesn't matter if you're lifting your finger or your foot or a bullet or a chair. Whatever is happening in the visible has an invisible seed. That is the law of the flower. It is the law of all material activities on this earth. There is an invisible cause for every visible effect. Now what is the seed of the visible forms that we see? And you come to the realization that the seed is your thought. Your belief is the seed of that which you witness as a visible form. Every seed of thought in you becomes a visible experience. The flower, visible. The experience, visible. Is there because invisibly there is a seed called thought. And because your visible experiences in the unillumined state are good and evil, and because there seems to be little opportunity to diminish that evil, when the idea of the power of God, the power of Spirit, the power of Christ grows in you, you're looking for new ways to change the seeds, because it is the seed that determines the flower. And if your seeds are divine, then your experiences in the outer will be divine. If your seeds are human, then your experiences in the outer will be human. So you begin to try to change human seeds of thought into divine seeds of thought. You begin to let go of your thought. And as it works, as you see that when you take no thought, more illumination comes through, divine thought comes through, and your new seeds produce harmonious activities out here, then you have a clue. And now you really roll up your sleeves in earnest. Because you know that the more divine seeds of thought that you have, the more harmonious your activity in the outer. And that becomes your way. That's how you release yourself from the false powers of this world. You're no longer bound in by them. You have the way out. And then comes the bigger thought. If divine seeds flower into harmonious activities, where can I find these divine seeds? And then you find that there is only one seed in reality. One infinite divine consciousness. And that infinite divine consciousness is the seed of Christ in you. And when you attain the realization of that one divine seed in you, all that can externalize is that seed. There's nothing else to grow. There are no human thoughts, no human seeds. Now you are erasing all human thought. Because you have the secret. Wherever there is a human thought, there will be a good appearance and a bad appearance. Wherever there is a divine thought, there will only be beauty, harmony, truth, so forth. And now you have a kingdom, divine consciousness. And here is where it's possible for you to take dominion over your world. Now suppose it's raining outside and you have friends coming over for dinner and your house has around it quite a bit of land and they trek through it in the rain and come up to your doorstep. Are you going to let them walk over your clean rugs? Or you're not going to say, well, why don't you wipe your feet out here, or why don't you take off your shoes or something? Are you going to let anyone come into your living room and throw dirt on the floor? Take cigarette ashes and flick them all over the place? Are you going to let anyone befoul the inside of your house? Certainly not. Now why is it different with your consciousness? Your consciousness is your living room. And you have the right to say to anyone who enters your living room, I cannot accept you in this house until you will be considerate of these surroundings. And you have that right to say the same thing to those who would enter your consciousness. Matter of fact, it's not only a right, it's a responsibility. In your spiritual integrity, you must maintain your consciousness without permitting the world to enter. And so it becomes a get thee behind me, Satan form of fidelity to spiritual consciousness, to your kingdom. Now just as I cannot enter your living room and befoul the premises, I cannot enter your consciousness if you are determined to maintain the integrity of it. And rather than tell me to do this or that, you do not accept me into your consciousness as a material being. That is how you go about it. Maintain your kingdom, you simply do not accept a material being into your kingdom. And this is a very stern discipline. You do not accept into your consciousness anything which is not the truth of God, the creation of God, the reality of God. And as you maintain a perfect kingdom, you are planting only divine seed. And every flower that comes up will be a flower and not a weed. Now this is the state of illumination that I think we may be at, in which we are now transmuting all of our past history on this earth. The memories, the experiences, the beliefs, the conditionings, and we are erasing by fidelity to the kingdom of spirit and consciousness. You may come to me, for example, and present yourself as sick. I have no right to accept you as sick. I may come to you and present myself as poor. You have no right to accept me as poor. You are the Christ consciousness that must maintain the awareness that there is no place in this universe where the perfect spirit is not functioning. You must have no other gods before your spiritual consciousness. Your fidelity to the first commandment is that. Have no gods before me. Your God is spirit. Omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient. And you rest in that awareness. You rest in the knowledge that the kingdom of God within you is the kingdom of God within each individual on the face of the earth, whether he knows it or not. You are not concerned about what someone else knows. You are concerned only about the truth. And therefore the kingdom of God within you, within your neighbor, within each individual on the face of the earth, whether he realizes it or not, is the one infinite spirit. And therefore you know that wherever that spirit is, the law of omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence is functioning. And you do not have a spiritual right to accept that anywhere in the spiritual kingdom, which is infinite, and which is the only, that there can be any form of evil. You do not have the right to accept it. And you have nothing to do about changing it. Because there is no evil in that spiritual kingdom to be changed. Your knowledge of this, your ability to stand in that knowledge, relaxed, at peace, saying, thank you, Father, for your infinite, omnipotent presence, is fidelity to the Christ. And the more you are able to do that, the more you can say, I have reached that point of illumination where I and the Father are no longer two. I'm no longer seeking God to overcome anything. I'm no longer seeking God to supply me with anything. I am resting in the acceptance of spiritual identity as my identity, and even as the identity of the person who would have come and befouled my living room, who would have come to befoul my consciousness. I accept your spiritual identity whether you do or not. And that's the only way I can maintain my spiritual integrity. Because the universe is your living room. There is no place in this universe that is not your spirit. And if you have not accepted that, this is the distance you still must travel. The infinite universe is one spirit. I am spirit, and therefore the one spirit of the universe is my spirit. Nobody can enter it to defile it, because I determine what will enter my consciousness and what will not enter. And I may see a thief, but he will not enter my consciousness as a thief. When he enters my consciousness, he's entering paradise. He is stripped of all his human appurtenances. He is stripped of all his human beliefs. When he enters my consciousness, it is because I recognize there the Spirit of God. Yes, it's a very great discipline, one of which we are not capable without a great deal of determined practice. And this is the crucifixion, the crossing out of the appearances, all around you. The continuous crossing out. Now the crucifixion and the resurrection and the ascension are all the activity of the healing consciousness. The discipline is to crucify the unreal which tries to grow in your garden by giving it no reality in your consciousness. This changes the seed from human to divine and is the resurrection in consciousness. And as it externalizes into form, you discover more and more that all of the heirship, the sonship, the oneship that you have attained in consciousness manifests as the glory of the Father, showing through into a physical world of harmony, until the moment when you can say, it matters not what is presented to me, by whom, or however close they may seem to be, the only substance that I recognize is the one that is the substance of God. And it being the perfect Spirit, whatever appears that is not perfect must be a mental image, must be a false consciousness showing forth a false form. And in this state, we begin to see that the mystery schools of the past still exist. But now they're not the same kind of mystery schools. They don't exist in the underground. They don't exist on the earth as actual mystery schools, but they exist in the invisible spirit. And your mystery school becomes an actual school on the other side of the veil of matter. And you enter it just as you would enter a mystery school in the past. You are initiated. You are led through. You are taught from within. This mystery school is the fulfillment of they shall all be taught by God. Now in this state, we have passed from spiritual ignorance to spiritual revelation. And although we're babes in the woods, we are nevertheless able to let the invisible consciousness supersede the activity of what had been a human mind. And now we find a great thing about seeds. Just as the seed is responsible for the flower, something else is responsible for the seed. Before the seed, there had to be the idea, which is implanted in the seed in a patterned form. And as that pattern unveils itself in the flower, we see that the flower is merely the effect of the pattern unveiling, but the pattern itself in the seed has been placed there by the universal mind, which in turn borrowed it from the divine mind. And the complete pattern now becomes almost a miniature microfilm called a seed. It's almost a motion picture projector in miniature. And the reason we are stressing that seed is this. Everything that is going to be in that flower starts in that seed, but starts before the seed in divine mind. And all of this is an object lesson, because you physically are a flower. A visible effect just like a flower. And you have a seed. The seed of the flower is really the same as the soul of you. Your soul is your seed. And in your soul is the pattern of the divine idea. Just as the invisible seed sprouts up into the flower, so does the invisible soul sprout into you. And when the the seat of the soul is neglected, and you live out of the mind, then you get the you that is unillumined and walks the earth wandering in a wilderness, apart from self, unnourished by the divine idea, unmaintained, unsustained, ever seeking. But when you are reunited with the soul, the divine pattern of your being emerges, and then the form is fed. Not the mental ideas of the world, the good and evil ideas, the unillumined ideas, the ideas of mortality, but the pattern of the soul unfolds, and this is the unfolding consciousness of God coming through your soul as the Word, the substance, the Spirit. And this is how you become the joint heir of God. The seed, which is your soul, from the invisible, grows your life. Without it, you're a man of earth creature. With it, you're son of God. With it, you're illumined. With it, a Moses becomes a leader. With it, a Jesus shows forth the power of the invisible. And this is our purpose then. And this is what the body is all about. The body and its experiences will either show forth a pattern in the soul or the patterns in the human mind. And the mind that you're living in, either that mind of the human or the soul mind, will determine the nature of your outer experience. When the soul is the pattern unfolding in you, it is because you have done that which we have been reluctant to do, and that is to lay down that mind which we think is the source of all our good. When we are able to sacrifice that mind, surrender it, rise above it, silence it, then we have caught the purpose and the way to attaining Christ consciousness. For in the silence of that mind, you are changing human seed, laying it aside, and you are receiving divine seed. Your God will be a divine God. Your life will be a divine life. You are making a change in consciousness, a transition from human seed to human thought, to divine seed to divine thought. And you are being transformed now by the renewing of the mind. This is the mind that was in Christ Jesus. And this is the only mind that can receive the will of God. Up to the moment where you are receiving from the soul, you are ignorant of the will of God. And therefore you cannot fulfill the commandment, thy will be done. But when the will of God, the pattern in the soul, is unfolding as you, that is the will of God expressing as you on earth as it is in heaven. And that form is under grace. That form is one with the Creator of the universe. That form is living with the one source. And that is our purpose. That is the purpose of the first commandment, to turn us so that we are one with that source and no other. Have no other gods before me. Now, as we maintain the integrity of our kingdom, then, we have one God, one source. We are living above the human mind. The soul is unfolding as the seed of being, and all that unfolds is under the protection and guidance of the divine mind. Now you have the Lord building your house. And you have the 127th Psalm, which tells you Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain that build it. All of our human castles go down the drain. Mortality remains mortality. But when the Lord builds the house, when you have permitted divine seed rather than human seed to be your God, then you are lifted to the new faculties which Jesus demonstrated. And in addition, the will of God unraveling in you lifts you to that higher consciousness which can be that which you are here to be. For our purpose here is not to acquire, but to bestow. Our purpose here is to serve, not to be served. And unless our motive is for spiritual enlightenment, you will discover that a false motive for personal acquisition or personal glory will make it impossible for you to receive the unfoldment of soul. Only when your desire is to serve, to be enlightened that you may serve, only then will the power of grace begin to demonstrate its presence in you. You may not find this out until you witness it in some who seek to acquire, to be something of themselves. And you can never be something of yourself for a simple reason. The only self there is God. And for any other self to try to be something automatically cuts it off from the only reality there is. And it is already then sentencing itself to a beginning and an end. Back to the cocoon state, the parenthesis. Now we are up in the air. We're not on the ground. We have discovered there is a God, a spirit, a living force, a power that I can rely upon. And so we go, and here's a fog bank up in the sky, but we don't mind. We go right through it. And over there there's a cloud burst, but we don't mind. And finally we're soaring above all this. And now we're in a plane long, far away from those first 22 minutes off the ground. We're doing our great solo across the Atlantic. And because the plane has controls, because we have our radio control, because we're in communication with the ground, because everything is perfect, there's nothing more to do. I of my own self can do nothing now. All I can do is fly. And this is your total dependence upon the Spirit. I of my own self, beyond mortal mind, I now must watch, behold, bear witness, and let the Spirit live itself as I eternally rest in that state of spirit which says there is no boundary, no limitation, no end. Spirit must continue to unfold its own way, and there is no me here to channel it, even to receive it. There is only Spirit itself. Now the me that was no longer is. I am crucified. The physical existence ceases to be the focus. Only Spirit. Thoroughly crucified. Thoroughly at peace. The image of the body is accepted as nothing more than an image.